Have you ever had one of those moments where you're surrounded by people who seem to have their lives completely together? That's how I felt the first time I attended Mark and Emily's wedding. The setting was idyllic. Think white doves, a flower-covered arch, and a reception that looked like it came straight out of a bridal magazine. I was Karen, the proud sister of the groom, and my heart swelled with happiness as I saw him standing at the altar, looking smitten as ever with Emily. "Isn't this just wonderful, Karen?" Emily's mother, Cynthia, gushed as she took a seat next to me. "It is, Cynthia. I've never seen Mark this happy." "Emily is perfect for him," I replied, scanning the crowd filled with smiling faces and expensive suits. I'd gotten along with Emily from the get-go. She was charming, to say the least. Intelligent, witty, and always wearing a smile that could light up a room. Our first meeting had felt like a conversation between old friends rather than a formal introduction. She talked about her job as an interior designer with such passion, and I couldn't help but respect her drive. "So, Emily tells me you're into marketing?" she had asked during one of our first chats. Guilty as charged. I love the psychological aspect of it, understanding what makes people tick. I had answered, thrilled to meet someone who was as passionate about their work as I was. We got along like a house on fire, and when they decided to get married, Emily asked me to be her maid of honor. How could I say no? I was so thrilled that Mark had found someone so wonderful, and equally thrilled that I was gaining a sister. The wedding went off without a hitch. When Emily threw the bouquet, it almost felt like divine intervention when I caught it, as if it were a sign that our newly united family was meant to be flawless. A couple of years later, Emily gave birth to Connor. I rushed to the hospital, hardly able to contain my excitement about becoming an aunt. As I held him for the first time, Mark looked at me and said, "Karen, meet your godson. Make sure to guide him well. Look at him. He's perfect," I whispered, taking in the sight of Connor's tiny fingers curled around mine. "You guys are going to be amazing parents," I said, looking at Mark and Emily, their eyes filled with joy, and perhaps a bit of understandable apprehension about the big journey they were embarking on as parents. But I had no doubts. If any couple had what it took to create a happy, loving home, it was them, I thought to myself. "So, when are we scheduling his first baseball game?" Mark joked, already envisioning future father-son outings. "Give it a few years, darling," Emily laughed. "For now, I think diapers and bottles are the main event." Looking at them, I felt content. Are the main event? Here were two people so in love, now parents to a beautiful baby boy. They had it all, a nice home, fulfilling careers, and now a family. What could possibly go wrong? As it turns out, plenty could go wrong. But back then, I was blissfully unaware of the unraveling that lay ahead. I was so entranced by the picture they had painted, a picture so perfect it belonged in a high-end gallery, that I ignored the possibility that behind it might lie a very different, darker story. And so as I left the hospital, Connor snug in his parents' arms, I felt a sense of completeness. My brother had a family, a beautiful one, and I was more than happy to be the doting aunt, blissfully ignorant of what the future held. Little did I know, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Sometimes, the most meticulously painted pictures hide the most cracks. And cracks, no matter how small, have a way of widening into chasms that can swallow you whole. Fast forward a few years and I found myself standing at the doorstep of Mark and Emily's lovely suburban home. I hadn't seen them in person since Connor's first birthday, but thanks to technology, distance hadn't been an issue. I had been on regular video calls with Emily, Mark, and especially Connor, who was growing up so fast it made my heart ache a little. When Emily opened the door, her face broke into a smile that could only be described as radiant.
"Karen, you made it. Come in, come in."
I wouldn't miss it for the world. I responded, handing her the bouquet of tulips I'd brought. "Wow, the place looks even better than the last time I was here."
"Ah, you know me, always rearranging things. A home is never finished, only ever evolving,"
Emily said, guiding me into their immaculate living room. It was filled with cozy furniture, decorative pillows, and framed family photos that dotted the walls, creating a sense of lived-in comfort and effortless style.
"Sis, you're here."
We embraced, and for a moment I felt a surge of nostalgia, a throwback to our childhood, when life was simpler, and the biggest problem we had was deciding which video game to play next. It's been too long, I said, pulling back to get a good look at him.
You're looking good, big bro.
Life's treating me well, can't complain. And you're looking amazing as always.
Mark replied, gesturing for me to sit down.
Just then, a small whirlwind dashed into the room. A small whirlwind dashed into the room. It was Connor. Auntie Karen, he shouted. His face lit up like a Christmas tree as he ran towards me. I bent down to hug him, lifting him up in the air as he giggled. Look at you, Connor. You've gotten so big, I exclaimed.
I missed you, Auntie Karen, he said, wrapping his tiny arms around my neck.
I missed you too, little man, I replied, setting him down. We all moved to the dining room, where a delicious home-cooked meal awaited us. Spaghetti carbonara, garlic bread, a Caesar salad, and for dessert, Emily's famous chocolate cake. It was like a feast, and I couldn't help but marvel at how Emily managed to maintain a career, a household, and still find time to cook such wonderful meals.
So, how's work treating you, Karen? He asked, taking a sip of his wine.
It's busy, but I love it. Just wrapped up a big campaign, so I finally had a chance to breathe and, well, hop on a plane to visit you guys, I answered, twirling my fork in the spaghetti.
That's awesome. You're killing it as always, Mark said, flashing me a proud smile.
Thank you. And how's the business? I asked.
Growing steadily. You know how it is, long hours, but it's all worth it, he replied.
As we chatted and laughed over dinner, I looked around at this picture-perfect family. Mark and Emily were thriving in their careers, and Connor seemed like a happy, well-adjusted child. There was love in the room, a deep, abiding love that I felt lucky to be a part of. As the evening came to an end, Emily showed me to the guest room.
I hope you like it. We redecorated it last month, she said.
It's beautiful, I said, taking in the freshly painted walls and new furniture. You guys have really built a lovely home, I added.
We're glad you're here to share it with us, Emily replied, giving me another hug before saying goodnight.
And so, as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for family, grateful for love, and grateful for what appeared to be a life that was going just as it should for everyone. I closed my eyes, letting the comforting darkness envelop me, completely unaware that the foundation of this picture-perfect family was built on shaky ground. In the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. My phone buzzed on the bedside table and groggily I reached over to check the time. 2:37 am. Squinting at the bright screen, I noticed I had received a work email. Old habits die hard, and despite the ungodly hour, I opened the email, read through it quickly, and sighed. It was something I would have to deal with, but not at that moment. Tossing my phone back on the table, I got up to get a glass of water. Emily had told me they recently remodeled their kitchen, and I was curious to see what they'd done. Padding down the staircase quietly so as not to wake anyone, I made my way to the kitchen. As I was filling up my glass at the sink, I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. There was a small figure lying on the living room floor. I set my glass down and tiptoed closer, only to realize it was Connor. Connor, what are you doing down here? I whispered, afraid to startle him. His eyes opened and he looked up at me, unfazed. It's tradition, Auntie Karen. Tradition? To sleep on the floor when you have a perfectly good bed upstairs? Yeah, Mom and Dad say it builds character, he mumbled, pulling his blanket closer around him. I was baffled and irritated. Mark and Emily had a 5-bedroom house. There was no reason for Connor to be sleeping on the floor. That doesn't sound right, I said, my voice tinged with concern. Are there any other traditions I should know about? Connor hesitated, then said, Well, sometimes I don't get dinner if I don't finish my chores. Dad says it's teaching me about the real world. My heart sank. No dinner. My mind started racing, trying to reconcile this new information with the idyllic family life I thought my brother and sister-in-law had created. Mark had always been disciplined, but this didn't sound like discipline, bordering on neglect. My eyes fell on Connor, his little face illuminated by the dim light of a table lamp. I couldn't stand by and let this go on. I knew what I had to do might cause a rift, but the well-being of my nephew was more important. Okay, go back to sleep, sweetie. We'll talk more in the morning, I told him, covering him back up with his blanket. As he closed his eyes, I quietly pulled out my phone and took several pictures of him sleeping there on the living room floor. I knew what I was about to do would be like setting fire to a bridge, but I felt in my gut it was the right thing. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and sent the pictures anonymously to Child Protective Services along with a brief explanation. If what Connor had said was true, and if there were more traditions like this, someone needed to intervene. And as much as it pained me to go against my own family, I knew I had to do something. Closing my laptop, I sat in the dark room, my mind awash with conflicting emotions. I was breaking a cardinal family rule: never air dirty laundry in public. But then again, weren't we also taught to protect each other no matter what? As I lay back down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I'd opened Pandora's box. But looking out the window at the moon, its light cast shadows on the floor, I knew I had done the right thing. I told myself that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. With a heavy heart, I closed my eyes, plunging into a restless sleep, knowing that the picture-perfect family I thought I knew was about to be shattered into 1,000 pieces. A few weeks passed since I sent those photos to Child Protective Services. My conscience was a battleground, and I kept going back and forth on whether I had done the right thing. The social worker assured me that the process would be confidential and thorough, but that didn't calm the storm inside me. I was betraying family, my own brother and sister-in-law. Yet every time I thought about Connor sleeping on the floor or going to bed hungry, a fire ignited within me. One evening while cooking dinner, my phone rang. It was Mark. My stomach churned as I picked up the call.
Hey Karen, how's everything? His voice was frayed, like a rope stretched too tight. Karen, CPS took Connor away today. They said they received an anonymous tip about child neglect. Can you believe that? I paused, my mouth dry as the Sahara.
Oh my God, Mark, that's terrible. What are they saying?
They're investigating us, Karen. Us. We have to go through a whole process now to prove we're fit parents. They're tearing our family apart. His pain was palpable, and yet I couldn't help but think this was a path he had carved himself.
Mark, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult this must be for you. But have you ever thought that there might be some validity to their concerns?
Are you implying we're bad parents? Mark's voice was now laced with incredulity.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that sometimes we think we're doing the right thing, and we may need an outside perspective to show us we're not.
I don't know what to think anymore, Karen. My son is gone, and I don't know how to get him back.
I understand, Mark, but sometimes things have to break down to be built up stronger. Maybe this is an opportunity for you and Emily to evaluate how you're raising Connor. A moment of silence stretched between us, heavy and tense.
We've got to go through a series of family counseling and parenting classes before we can even apply to get him back. It's going to be a long process.
I think that could be beneficial, don't you? I ventured cautiously. For all of you to work through things professionally.
Maybe you're right, Mark admitted, albeit reluctantly.
Okay, Mark. Good luck, and keep me updated, please. As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread, for the confrontation that I knew was inevitable. If the investigation went the way I thought it would, Mark and Emily would be required to make changes. Ones that hopefully would benefit Connor in the long run. But at the same time, I wondered how this would affect my relationship with my family. Turning off the stove, I sat down, my appetite lost. I pondered over the notion of tradition that Mark and Emily had instilled. Were they truly archaic methods of teaching life lessons, or were they a veiled form of neglect? Sometimes the line between the two is blurry, but it was becoming increasingly clear to me that their idea of character building was perilously close to compromising Connor's well-being. And as much as it hurt to be the catalyst in this familial chaos, if it meant Connor would be safer and happier, I was ready to face the fallout. Sometimes traditions are comforting, but sometimes they need to be unraveled, torn apart, and built anew. And I hoped, for the sake of my nephew and my family, that this was the beginning of a new, healthier tradition. Several more weeks went by, filled with a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I found myself constantly checking my email and phone, half expecting to see an update from Child Protective Services or a call from Mark. Finally, One chilly afternoon, I received the email I had been anxiously awaiting. The subject read, "Case update, custody decision." With a pounding heart, I opened the email. After a lengthy investigation, CPS had determined that Connor should not return to Mark and Emily's custody, at least not immediately. However, the email also mentioned that temporary guardianship could be transferred to a family member, while Mark and Emily underwent mandated family counseling and parenting courses. This was my chance to step in. Yes, it would mean taking on a huge responsibility, but I couldn't bear thought of Connor being placed in a foster home, surrounded by strangers, while his parents got their act together. I immediately picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Paul, it's Karen. I need your help. My nephew has been taken into CPS custody, and I want to apply for temporary guardianship." Paul, ever the pragmatist, began asking a series of questions. "Are you prepared for this, Karen? It's a big commitment, and it will certainly affect your life in various ways." "I know, Paul, but it's something I have to do." "What's the process?" Paul outlined the legal steps required, emphasizing the need for speed given that Connor was currently in a temporary holding situation. "You need to act fast, Karen. The courts prefer placing children with family, but they won't wait around. You should file the petition for temporary guardianship as soon as possible." I found myself sitting in a sterile government office, facing a stern-looking social worker. "So, you're the aunt?" she stated, more than asked, flipping through the papers on her desk. "Me? Yes, that's correct," I replied, trying to maintain a composed demeanor. "And you're fully aware of the circumstances that led to Connor being removed from his parents' custody?" "Me, I am," I answered, my voice tinged with a blend of sadness and determination. She looked up, locking eyes with me. "Because I love him," I said simply, "and because I won't let him sleep on the floor or go hungry as some sort of twisted life lesson, I can provide a stable, loving environment for him until his parents can do the same." The social worker nodded, jotting down notes. "Very well. The court will have the final say, but your petition will be strongly considered, especially since you're family." As I left the building, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, yet replaced by another, different kind of weight. This new weight was a mixture of hope and responsibility, bound together by the love I felt for Connor. Upon reaching home, I immediately began preparing what would be Connor's room should the court decide in my favor. As I stood there, paintbrush in hand, painting the walls a soothing shade of blue, my thoughts were on the future. The coming weeks would be a whirlpool of legal proceedings and family counseling, likely bringing uncomfortable truths to light. There would be repercussions, of course, strained relationships and awkward family dinners. But looking around the room, that would hopefully soon be filled with the laughter and energy of a young boy who deserved so much better, I felt confident that I had made the right choice. Sometimes, to do the right thing, you have to take matters into your own hands, even if those hands tremble as you do it. I was about to disrupt our family status quo, maybe irrevocably so. But as I dipped the paintbrush back into the can, I realized that sometimes disruption is necessary to bring about change. And as far as I was concerned, change couldn't come soon enough. It took a full month of legal back and forth, but the day finally came when Connor walked hesitantly through my front door, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. I bent down to his level, looking into his eyes filled with confusion and a sense of loss. "Welcome home, Connor," I said softly, my voice almost a whisper. He hesitated for a moment, then threw his arms around me. "Thanks, honey, Karen." That hug sealed it. It was worth the mountains of paperwork, the awkward court hearings, and even the fiery argument I had with Mark last week.
"How could you, Karen? He's our son, not yours. Karen, can we talk?"
"I'm listening, Mark."
"We've been through most of the counseling and classes, and we're making changes, significant ones."
"I want to thank you."
"Yes, because you did what we couldn't do for ourselves. Put Connor first. You were right. The family was broken, and while I don't know if we can ever fix what's shattered, maybe we can start anew."
"So what happens now?"
"We want to slowly reintegrate Connor into our life, with the counselor's oversight, of course. Maybe a weekend visit to start?"
"That sounds like a plan, Mark. Let's work out the details."